Most of my passion is obviously in the work of hyperbaric therapy. And so I gravitated towards creating an integrative approach to hyperbaric therapy.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Thrive State Podcast. Your host here, Dr. V, triple board certified MD and performance and longevity expert. And on today's podcast, I bring a very exciting technology that has actually been in medicine for quite some time. But the more we do research on it, the more exciting it becomes, because not only does this technology have many medical uses, including compression sickness, carbon monoxide poisoning, infections, strokes, heart attacks, the list continues. But there's a lot of research now with using this particular technology in improving cognitive and physical performance, in extending longevity, in getting rid of zombie cells of our body, and overall increase of vitality, performance, and improve epigenetics that decreases inflammation and increases immunity in our body. This technology is hyperbaric oxygen therapy, also known as HBOT. And on today's podcast, we'll be going over what exactly is hyperbaric oxygen therapy. What is the mechanism of action of how it works in the body? What are the medical conditions that are treated with HBOT? And what is the future in HBOT as it pertains to optimal health, longevity, and peak performance? All this and more on today's podcast. And my guest is super, super energetic. You could tell that he is really passionate about the field. He is actually one of the pioneers in the field of HBOT. And I am just so fortunate that he was able to join us. Now, this is actually a very special podcast because we actually did the podcast in my men's mastermind group. It's an exclusive group of men wanting to reach optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. And so they got a chance to ask some of their questions as well. As you'll hear in this podcast, it was a super fun time. So let me introduce you to our guest, Dr. Scott Sherr. Dr. Scott Sherr is actually board certified in internal medicine and in hyperbaric oxygen therapy and health optimization medicine. He's the founder of Integrative HBOT and is one of the few providers in the world that actually uses an integrative approach to HBOT. Now, this approach actually uses cutting edge and dynamic HBOT protocols, comprehensive laboratory testing, targeted supplementation, personal practice, and synergistic technologies. Dr. Scott actually runs his HBOT consulting, educating, and advocacy practice through his website, integrativehbot.com. Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to have a treat because this is the foremost expert in HBOT. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Scott Sherr. Dr. Scott Sherr, welcome to the Thrive State Podcast, brother.
What's going on? Thanks for having me.
You got it. You got it. You are actually on... We're actually doing a podcast now with my very special men's mastermind group. So this is a very special session. So I just want to remind all the participants in the group right now, if you are not asking a question now, just to mute yourselves. And Scott, we're going to start off with a segment called 5 to Thrive. It's a game show type of game worth 5,000 points. And if you win, I take you out to dinner the next time I see you. Each question's worth 1,000 points. This is just to lubricate the conversation a little bit.
Lubrication's always good. I like that.
It's always good. So, yeah. Dr. Sherr, are you ready to play 5 to Thrive?
I'm ready. Sure.
All right. Question number 1. What did you dream about being as a kid?
So I grew up the son of a chiropractor, and I was in his office and kind of grew up knowing that I was going to be involved in helping people in some way. Mm-hmm. I just didn't know what exactly that was going to look like until I got older. But so I would say basically in the realm of service professional, I would say, because I enjoyed what my father did on some level and I wanted to help people as well.
Awesome. 1,200 points for that one. Pretty good there. Question number 2 is, what was your favorite childhood activity?
Probably playing soccer, I would say. I was a big soccer player until I finished high school. Wasn't good enough to go to college and do it, but I enjoyed it. My brother was always better than me at sports. He's younger than me. He had a little more of a competitive edge being the younger child. Type A, first child, that would be me, but certainly not as competitive as he was. So I would say probably playing soccer and then also playing guitar. I was a big musician back when I had more time and I didn't have 4 children. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have an experience with my younger brother. I auditioned for the role of the Last Emperor. He actually got it when he didn't want the role,
Oh,
and
that's great.
becomes basically the poster child of
I
this
remember
movie.
that movie. That's a great
Yeah,
movie.
yeah, right. He played
Yeah.
young Puyi.
Wow.
Question number 3 was, what was probably one of the most pivotal struggles that you had in life, and what did you learn from that experience?
How long do I have to answer this question?
1 minute, less than a minute. But we might dive into it a little bit deeper, but something quick.
Well, I would say that when I was looking to get myself out of regular conventional medicine,
Yeah.
I had a lot of fits and starts. And I realized a lot of it was because I was trying too hard to kind of mold myself in other people's view of what they thought I should do instead of what I really wanted to do personally and professionally. And so it was a big shift, and it was a very tumultuous one, but very, very gratifying in the end, because that's how I established my own practice, my own sort of online integrative advocacy education persona, let's call it, and then also kind of gravitated towards a bigger view of what hyperbaric therapy could do, I would say.
Ooh, amazing. Question number 4 here. Outside of hyperbaric medicine, what would you say is maybe the 1 or 2 exciting new forefronts in medicine that you're excited about?
I'm also the chief operating officer of a nonprofit company called Health Optimization Medicine. And it is a nonprofit that's educating doctors on root cause health. You know, we always talk about root cause disease and functional medicine and others, but we're more interested in focusing on health and health related metrics. And so we have a certification course for doctors and practitioners that I'm really excited to get out to people this year. We just finished it the end of last year, and it's a 7-module essential certification with advanced modules, 1 in peptides actually, and 1 in cannabis as well. So very exciting, and excited to get that out to the world this year.
Sounds good. Last question, less than a minute left. What do you want your gift to the world to be?
That's a good one. I would say that if we can create a new perspective on health, in the sense of understanding that the way we're doing things in conventional medicine is reactive instead of proactive and responsive, and we could become more of a responsive and proactive field, but doing things more health focused, I think that I've done, even if I've just helped maybe a small segment of the population, I'd be very happy with that, I would say.
Let's tally up the points there. Whoa, out of 5,000, you got 5,555 points, which means you win dinner with me, my friend. I'm glad that you played. Why aren't you glad you played 5 to Thrive?
My question to you, has anybody not gotten dinner for me afterwards is the question. But that's okay. I'll take it. You know, I'll take it.
People are really good. I mean, I only have the best of the best guests. Come on. So
I'll take it. Flattery is always helpful.
Let's dive in a little bit deeper right now, because we wanted to know kind of like how you found sort of your niche in hyperbaric and really become one of the thought leaders around there. When did you get exposure to that? And I would imagine that your early experiences with your chiropractor father led you to your health destiny currently. But
yeah, definitely had a big part of it. I would say I always knew that I wanted to get involved in the healthcare profession. I thought about chiropractic for a little while, but then I actually decided to become a regular medical doctor like you, Dr. Vu, us medical doctors. And I think there's a couple other docs here as well. Right. I was noticing. And I decided to go to medical school because I thought in this sort of high-minded way that I could figure out a way to kind of take all that alternative medicine that I had grown up with and then learn conventional medicine and then find a way to kind of bridge the chasm between the two. And I first experienced hyperbaric oxygen therapy when I was a third-year medical student at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. They have a place called Shock Trauma, and Baltimore is known for its shock and trauma and The Wire and other things like that some of you probably have heard of before. And so with a lot of gunshot wounds, a lot of stabbings, a lot of craziness. And they had a gigantic hyperbaric chamber in actually the downstairs in the basement. And I saw people going in there with necrotizing fasciitis, with burns, with soft tissue infections, otherwise amputations or partial amputations, and do amazingly well. People sometimes were on ventilators when they went into the chamber and then walked out of the chamber if it was like carbon monoxide poisoning, for example. And I was just kind of floored with the simplicity of the technology and how easy it was on some level to just put somebody in a chamber and then just take them out afterwards and see all these massive benefits of being under oxygen for 60, 90, 120 minutes or whatever it might be. And so that's how I got really interested in hyperbaric therapy. And I got initially certified online, I think in 2007. And then I became a medical director of a facility in San Francisco when I moved to California in 2002. 2013 timeframe. So there was a bit of a break there. I was still in medical school residency. I trained in internal medicine. I thought about all those fancy specialties, like some of us on this call probably thought about all the money I can make being a radiologist or dermatologist or gastroenterologist. But I decided just to do straight up internal medicine and kind of get out. And I still practice actually part of the time in the hospital as a hospitalist, where I live now locally in Colorado. But most of my passion is obviously in the work of hyperbaric therapy. And so I gravitated towards creating an integrative approach to hyperbaric therapy, where 80% of my practice has nothing to do with hyperbaric therapy at all. And about 20% is about hyperbaric therapy, because it's this fantastic tool to help with accelerating healing, recovery, optimization. And it's a very global technology. It really does work on so many levels.
Yeah.
But if you're not looking at the before, during, and after, as far as how you're optimizing before, what are you doing, especially in the beginning? If you don't have an optimized levels of, if you can't make energy effectively, for example, how well are you going to do under oxygenated conditions and things like that? So I created a practice that kind of uses hyperbaric therapy as its main driver, but a lot of integrative technologies, practices, practitioners, other ways of looking at health inside of that.
Just one tool in a very integrative approach. So let's dive a little bit into the pathophysiology of why hyperbarics works. And once we dive into that, then we can start to understand why, there's just so many indications of what it is. So can you first explain to, some of the audience that is going to be listening to this have no medical background at all. So what exactly is hyperbaric oxygen?
Well, you keep giving me the pun over and over again, which is diving into hyperbaric oxygen therapy, because we call each treatment in a hyperbaric chamber a dive.
Right.
So hyperbaric therapy actually originated as a treatment for the bends or the decompression illness, which can happen if divers come up too fast from the surface. And this happened back in the 1880s when they were building bridges and other underwater projects like that. And they realized that if they put people inside of a pressurized environment that simulated the pressure that they felt under a certain amount of seawater, that their symptoms would often go away if they didn't die ahead of time, of course. But hyperbaric therapy is a very simple technology. It really combines increased atmospheric pressure and increased inspired oxygen. And so I like to think about oxygen first, because we all know that that's kind of a big deal. Right. At sea level, when most of us are, I'm at 5,000 feet, but at sea level, you have 21% oxygen in the air that you breathe. At 5,000 feet where I am, it's about 16% oxygen in circulation or in the air that you breathe. The rest of it is mostly nitrogen. And we typically carry oxygen on red blood cells. Red blood cells are the cells that carry oxygen from our lungs, where we breathe in and we pick up the oxygen. They go on the red blood cell, and then they go diffuse into the rest of your body throughout your blood vessels and your miles and miles of blood vessels that you have that allow us to get oxygen to tissues. And then once the oxygen gets to your cells, it gets to the area of your cell called the mitochondria, which is a very specialized organelle that allows you to make ATP, which is the currency of energy. And so typically oxygen carrying capacity is relegated to how many red blood cells you have in circulation, because exercise can increase the amount of oxygen that's kind of pumping through because you're getting more blood flow going through. But you have a number of red blood cells in circulation, and there's a finite number. So typically when we talk about oxygen carrying capacity, we talk about increasing the number of red blood cells in circulation. You can do that by going altitude training, because hypoxia actually increases a hormone called epigen, which stimulates the production of new red blood cells in circulation. You could also be like Lance and have one testicle, just kidding, or just or take epigen, and you actually can take it exogenously or take it as a subcutaneous injection. That's also going to increase the red blood cell mass, the number of red blood cells in circulation. But there's also another way to increase oxygen carrying capacity, and that's actually to diffuse oxygen directly into the bloodstream or the plasma itself. And that's where pressure comes into it. So we increase atmospheric pressure in the chamber because that atmospheric pressure actually drives oxygen not only onto the red blood cells, but also into the plasma or into the liquid of your blood. Typically, the liquid of your blood has very little oxygen in it at sea level. And if we increase the amount of pressure on your lungs when you're breathing, so we simulate the pressure that you'd feel under a certain amount of seawater, that actually is going to drive oxygen, liquid oxygen, directly into the plasma or the liquid of your blood. And you can get up to about 1,200% more oxygen in circulation that way as compared to sea level. So in a hyperbaric chamber, you're increasing the amount of pressure in the chamber by simulating the amount of seawater you're under. And the second thing you're doing is increasing the amount of inspired oxygen that you're breathing, usually 21% up to about 100% oxygen that you're breathing. You combine those things together, you get a lot more oxygen in circulation.
I see. So now I understand it has, quite a few benefits. Now I would understand in wounds where you have damage of blood vessels. Now, if the blood can't get there, it could still diffuse across from your plasma and whatnot into the injured area.
Exactly. So the way to think about hyperbaric therapy is that there's the acute infusion of oxygen, that massive flood of oxygen. And then there's the benefits of a long-term oxygen infusion protocol. The acute processes that happen, the acute infusion is going to reverse hypoxia, reverse low oxygen states. So heart attacks, strokes, traumatic brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, trauma to a limb, trauma to the body. If you can reoxygenate the body very fast, you could potentially prevent tissue from dying. Kind of a big deal. And so it's used in trauma settings all over the world for that reason. It also massively increases the number of stem cells that are released almost automatically, almost instantaneously, I should say, from your bone marrow. And so stem cells are the baby cells that can go to the rest of your body to help produce new types of cells within the tissues that have been damaged, for example. It upregulates your immune system, so it improves it starts with all the initial cells that get to an area that's been damaged, so all the neutrophils, macrophages, improving immune system function in that way. They're immediately decreasing inflammation, decreasing swelling, fighting infection, so infections that do not like high oxygen environments, and also improving flow, improving blood flow into tissue, and then improving blood flow or lymphatic flow, out of tissue. So for acute trauma, hyperbaric therapy is extremely helpful and can be extremely therapeutic in people that have all these kinds of crazy things that I've just described, but also for people that have just had a surgery or just had an injury or have a hangnail, or embolism. I mean, in the sense that it's all going to rev up the body's own process of allowing healing to happen faster. But the kicker is that the shift over to the long-term benefits of a hyperbaric protocol are in the epigenetic shifts that happen on your DNA. Yeah. This is related to the expression and suppression of various genes that are responsible for growth, responsible for decreasing inflammation and preventing cell death as well. So, and that's when you have things like angiogenesis happening, things like the downregulation of inflammatory cytokines, like IL-1, IL-6, IL-8, and TNF alpha. It's as powerful as steroids, actually, in some studies looking at the power of hyperbaric therapy to decrease inflammation. And then you also have these stem cells that are maturing and becoming the rebuilding the architecture of tissue that's been damaged over time. And so you have these new blood vessels, you have new stem cells, you have more flow in and out of tissue. So it's basically an optimizer from the ground up in the cellular, like from the tissue level.
That is a lot to unpack there. So just to summarize for everybody who's listening, it sounds like in the acute form, you're really relieving low oxygen tension and you just bring a lot of oxygen in. And in that state there, you're going to release stem cells in your body. You're also going to be reducing inflammation there. More long-term, you drive epigenetic changes to your DNA that drives more angiogenesis, which is increase in blood flow, along with a decrease in inflammation and a boost in immunity. So that's kind of summarizes that for us. So let me ask you now, what are the current proven medical indications for hyperbaric oxygen therapy?
So right now in the US, there's 14 indications that are currently covered by Medicare and most insurance coverage. Most of them are inpatient. There's 4 that are outpatient ones. There's diabetic foot ulcers, radiation injury from cancer treatment. So if you've had radiation to your prostate, to your brain, to your neck, and you've had a radiation injury in that area that doesn't heal for 6 months or develops 6 months after radiation has been given. So radiation, unfortunately, what it does, it can kill cancer cells, but also can deplete tissue of blood vessels, of stem cells. And so that tissue always becomes more at risk for damage over time. And it's fantastically effective at regenerating that tissue. That's what hyperbaric therapy does, rebuild stem cells and angiogenesis, et cetera. There's also flaps and grafts that are usually done in plastic surgery. So if those are at risk for not taking, or there's some issues that look like they're dusky or not working, then you can use hyperbaric therapy to help regenerate that tissue and make sure that it does actually take as a graft. There's also chronic bone infections, osteomyelitis, cyanide poisoning. So don't get poisoned with cyanide if you can avoid it. But if you have a hyperbaric chamber around, you should be okay. Necrotizing fasciitis, which is the flesh-eating bacteria, What else am I missing? So the acute traumas, the compartment syndromes, the partial limb amputations, scorpion bites. Don't get bitten by a scorpion, but we have hyperbaric chambers for those. Decompression illness. But the bigger category is what we call the investigational conditions.
Yes,
these are the conditions
that's what we want to dive into next. You read my mind.
Yes.
So yeah, let's go into the investigational. And I know that there are people using it for sort of performance as well as longevity issues as well.
Yeah. So, and that's what's really exciting, because I got involved in sort of the biohacking world many years ago and understood how hyperbaric therapy could be a fantastic synergizer, accelerator, not only of healing, but also of optimizing and improving performance. And there's been a lot of studies that have been out of a place called Asaf Harafei Hospital in Israel by a colleague of mine. His name is Dr. Shai Efrati. And if you can look at some of his talks if you're interested. But basically what he's done over the last 5 to 10 years with, about almost since 2013 is when his first studies started coming out, is he's had a very, very wealthy benefactor, and he's done a lot of great work. And what they've basically shown is that hyperbaric therapy can reverse hallmarks of aging. It reverses them in a lot of different ways, but especially in the hallmarks that are related to deterioration of the brain over time with new blood vessels growing in the brain, deterioration of the heart, so regrowing blood vessels and density of blood vessels around the heart. They actually published a study on erectile dysfunction using hyperbaric therapy to reverse that with significant benefit, showing MRIs of the penis before and after. Quite interesting to show in lecture slides, because people don't know what you're showing. It's just like it looks like a tube with different blood vessels. So you don't know what it is unless I tell you. But so hallmarks of aging certainly seem to be reversed, including things like senescent cells. These are cells that tend to build up as we get older. They're called zombie cells. They're cells that don't divide anymore. They have a higher predisposition to becoming cancerous cells and causing inflammation. So those populations of cells seem to decrease. There's also telomere lengthening as well. That's been shown in some studies as well. So about a 20% increase in telomere length with some of the protocols that they've used. And so certainly using hyperbaric therapy for the anti-aging, reverse aging type of population that are interested in just optimizing their health as they age. Of course, it's not just about getting the chamber. If you're smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol all day or eating hummus, if you're in Israel, it's certainly not going to be as effective as it potentially could be. So my goal always is, with all these performance related protocols, especially, and things that are not so much acute protocols where you just want to get somebody in the chamber, is more, how can you optimize health overall? And so that the chamber becomes this massive synergizer and accelerator. But we're using it also for regenerative medicine. So in combination with things like PRP and stem cell therapy, we're using it in combination with prolozone and other ozone types of therapy as well. I'm using it in athletes all the time for improving cardiac function, endurance, and also improving recovery. I have a lot of athletes that use it purely for its recovery capabilities, because if you're able to get more oxygen in the system, you're going to detoxify faster. So sleep scores go up, recovery goes up, sleep in general goes up. And so we're using it in a lot of those capacities as well.
Wow. Pretty amazing technology. So let me ask you, are there any contraindications to hyperbarics? Who should not be doing this?
Yes. So it's a medical therapy. We always have to remember that this is a prescribed therapy. So there are different types of chambers on the market. They're the mild units. These are soft bag kind of chambers, and they're sometimes found in clinics, but you can also have them in your house. I have one in my house downstairs in the basement, for example. And then you have medical grade chambers, which go to deeper pressures, more oxygen, potentially more therapeutic indications. However, the mild chambers combined with lots of other technologies might have or approximate some of the other things that we can do in medical grade deeper chambers. But all that high level, as far as who can't go into the chamber, the main reasons you can't go into a chamber is if you have significant cardiac disease, if you have significant pulmonary disease, because we're putting you under increased pressure. So any reason why you can't go under pressure, you wouldn't want to go into hyperbaric environment. So if you have COPD, emphysema, you don't oxygenate well already, you're on home oxygen, not a good idea. Restrictive lung disease, really bad asthma that's not controlled, cardiac disease, if you have a congestive heart failure with an ejection fraction less than 35%, typically not a great idea. We can do it under certain circumstances, but in general, we don't like to do it unless we absolutely need to. We also don't want to put people in there that have uncontrolled seizures. Under high oxygen conditions, you do have a decreased seizure threshold. It's very uncommon to have a seizure in the chamber. In fact, we have lots of different ways to decrease the risk. One of them is called air breaks. So instead of breathing 100% oxygen, so those people that have uncontrolled seizures have a high risk of having seizures in the chamber. We have lots of ways we can mitigate seizures in the chamber and mitigate any risk of oxygen toxicity. One of the best ways we do that is something called an air break. So typically when you're in a chamber, you're breathing extra oxygen, usually through a face mask or a hood, or sometimes 100% oxygen in the chamber that you're actually in. And then every 20 minutes or 30 minutes or so, we have you breathe sea level air instead of the extra oxygen. And that's at deeper pressures, especially. And the reason we do that is to help prevent oxygen toxicity. But there's actually some really interesting data that just came out about a year ago, something called the hyperoxic hypoxic paradox. That's it, HHP for short. And what that basically means is that when we're doing those air breaks, we're changing you from 100% oxygen, let's say, to 21% oxygen, which is the amount of oxygen we have at sea level. The body sees that as actually going under low oxygen conditions and releases the same kind of factors that it would if it was under lower oxygen conditions. So that actually looks like what it does is increasing stem cell release, increasing angiogenesis, and also, which is new blood vessel formation, and increasing mitochondrial biogenesis, so new mitochondria per cell, which is pretty awesome too. Yes. So that's what is often being done in most of the protocols that you're going to some of the deeper pressures in the chamber, but we're starting to look at them in the milder environments as well to see if it could have the same effect.
This episode of the Thrive State podcast is brought to you by the Thrive State Accelerator. The Thrive State Accelerator is actually a home course that I developed using the exact same techniques I work with my celebrity clients, CEOs, and executives on how to get them to the Thrive State. The Thrive State Accelerator teaches you how to master your 7 bioenergetic elements. That's sleep, nutrition, movement, stress and emotional mastery, relationships, our thoughts and mindset, as well as purpose. In this Thrive State Accelerator, you're also going to get a bonus module on optimization. That's how I talk about supplementation, peptides, all the optimization techniques I use with my clients to get them to the Thrive State. Now, for some of you who are just joining us for the first time, you guys might be wondering, what is the Thrive State? Well, the Thrive State is actually the energy, the epigenetic environment we give to ourselves, telling our DNA how to act and how to respond. And if we want optimal health, longevity, and peak performance, if we can master these 7 bioenergetic elements, our ability to have those 3 things that we just said, optimal health, longevity, and peak performance, is at its greatest. And it also prevents you from getting chronic symptoms like brain fog, being overweight, feeling sluggish, acne, pain, all these chronic symptoms, as well as preventing you from getting chronic disease. So getting to that Thrive State is really getting to that state to master being that very best version of yourself so you could show up for you, for your family, for your business, everything that's important to you. So go ahead, check it out right now at kienvu.com/accelerator and use coupon code podcast25 for 25% off. Now back to the podcast. Amazing. I have a few more questions, but I want to bring some of our mastermind people on. So I'm going to start off with Dave Stewart. Dave Stewart, I'm going to unmute you and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Great to have you here, Scott. Somewhat familiar with Shia Farazi's technique, the pulsing. And I recall the protocol is 10 minutes at 2 atmospheres and then down to sea level and then 10 up. And he does this, I believe, for an hour. I think that to get the brain effect, he talks about for an hour and a half, 5 days a week, 6 weeks. What sort of protocols are you using?
So the best way to start there, David, is to think about the protocols of hyperbaric therapy typically are longer than that. 6 weeks to 8 weeks, it's sort of with most of Shia's protocols. But what he also does, he changes the oxygen. He doesn't change the pressure. And so the pressure stays the same. He typically goes to 2 atmospheres in his chambers, which is the equivalent of 33 feet of seawater or 10 meters for those that are not American. And what he does at the 2 atmospheres is that he has somebody breathe 100% oxygen for 20 minutes. And then at the 20-minute mark, he has them breathe 21% oxygen for 5 minutes. And he alternates back and forth for a 90-minute treatment at pressure. And most of Shai's protocols are 60 treatments in length, 60. So that's 3 months of hyperbaric therapy, Monday through Friday, weekends off for 3 months. So it's a significant time commitment. I've often asked him, how does he get people to do it in Israel? He's like, I tell them to come and they show up. In the US, it's just not that easy. Right. And so what I've done over the years is always looking, what's your MVP here? How much can you really get away with, in quotes, to see a significant benefit that people will see sustainably, but not potentially do the 60 treatments. And so a lot of it depends on how old you are, how many other medical issues that you have and everything. But often, so the study that I was referring to before on senescent cells and telomere length, that study showed that the maximum number, like the maximum amount of senescent cell downregulation happened around treatment 30. So for most people, I think the MVP for this reverse aging protocol that Shai has developed is usually around 30 treatments. But in my practice, it's about how you're optimizing beforehand, optimizing levels of vitamins, minerals, nutrients, antioxidants, gut health, hormones, all that kind of stuff. I have my own practice called Health Optimization Medicine, which is based on the work of the nonprofit that I'm the chief operating officer of, and based on the work of a colleague and mentor of mine who developed it. His name is Dr. Ted Atracoso. But the idea for me is, if somebody's going to come in and say, hey, doc, I want to optimize, I want to get in the chamber to do the Ephrati protocol, do Dr. Shai's protocol, I often say, well, we can do 60 or we can do 30. But I recommend either way, we really look at optimizing your health beforehand. So I'll either do the work myself or recommend other people in my network for them to go see, depending on where they are and kind of what jives with them the most. A lot of functional medicine docs in my network as well that I refer to as well. So, but yes, short answer is not changing the pressure, but changing the oxygen. You make a good point though, David, is that I'm actually working on some new protocols now where we're actually looking at how we can change the pressure. And I have a company that I started with some new hardware that we're testing that does that in some very prescribed ways to see if that also can have a significant benefit. Because we know that pressure by itself is massively therapeutic. It actually has a direct effect at making energy more effectively in your cells, even without more oxygen in circulation. And it does that in a couple different ways. But one of them is the sheer stress on the cell itself, and actually how that creates this hydrostatic pressure, this increased pressure on the cell to make more energy on the cellular level. So long story short is there's a lot of really interesting things that are happening in my field.
That brings up two additional questions on my side. Is you mentioned just now the pressure being a significant component. There's a therapy out there called exercise with oxygen therapy, or EWOT, and they propose there to be similar effects as that, but obviously there's no pressure being done. Excuse me if I'm wrong, but I believe what they do is have people do HIIT sessions while just breathing higher concentrations of oxygen, correct?
Yes, I'm very familiar with exercise with oxygen therapy. There's a number of different companies that make devices and like to say that their treatments are better and faster than hyperbaric oxygen therapy for the benefits. There is just no comparison that's ever been made to the two to make that statement, but anybody can say what they want on the internet, right? But at the same time, I certainly think that there's benefits for what they're doing. Exercise with oxygen therapy is based on some German work that was done back in the 1980s. His guy's name is Arden. And it's a really interesting textbook on how if you increase cardiac output to a certain amount, you can actually kind of break through certain sort of what happens as I was alluding to before, we have like miles and miles of blood vessels in our body. Not all of them are getting perfused at any one time. Everything's getting perfused. And we have these sphincter kinds of areas that triage blood where it needs to go. And what they think happens in exercise with oxygen therapy is that you open up some of these sphincters and allow more oxygen and more blood to get to these areas more efficiently. And that certainly might still happen. And I think it's certainly intriguing. But there really is no way of knowing if that's as comparable to hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And then, of course, you have to be doing significant cardiac output as well to really benefit. And so I have a lot of the athletes that I work with that do exercise with oxygen therapy. They'll do contrast therapy too. There's additional types of technology where you actually breathe less oxygen and then you breathe 100% oxygen on a bike, and you can do adaptive contrast that way. And so I have a lot of athletes that use it, but it's not for everybody. That's for sure. The best thing about hyperbaric therapy is it just diffuses and infuses your body with so much more oxygen, and you don't have to do anything but breathe. And it's a restorative technology in that capacity. So I think that there's ways you can pair them together. And I have worked with athletes to do that, but there are different technologies, and really exercise with oxygen therapy requires exercise. And there's no way of knowing. And it's really not, I don't think it's possible to get as much oxygen in circulation that way as it would be to get into a hyperbaric chamber.
Sounds good. Let's go to John McGuire. John McGuire, go ahead and come on in and ask your question.
Yeah, I'm loving this. I've had a session of hyperbaric oxygen therapy, but I'm wondering, just for general health optimization, I've got some inflammation going on, and I got a local unit that I can go to. First of all, how many sessions, how often would be good, just as a general health optimization?
Yeah, it's a really good question, John. And it really depends on a number of factors. If you're looking at more sort of neurocognitive optimization, as opposed to more sort of systemic full body optimization, the neurocognitive optimization protocols do real well in home chambers. And so that's why I have my chamber here. I use it for neurocognitive optimization. And the deeper chambers are really more for systemic inflammation and systemic optimization. Now, as I was alluding to before, there's probably some approximation you can make in the mild units if you have other technologies that improve blood flow. So for example, in my house, I have low-level light therapy. I have pulse electromagnetic field technologies. I use supplements as well that can help with vasodilation, things like niacin and others, but that to help increase blood flow systemically, even in a mild unit. But what I usually recommend, John, for most people is that when they're looking to get the benefits of being in a chamber, what you want to start off with is not only that acute infusion of oxygen that we were describing initially, but also get some benefits of that long-term protocol, which changes how your genes are being expressed. And that requires usually at least around 20 sessions in the chamber regularly, like a Monday through Friday, weekends off for like a month.
Wow.
You can also do it twice a day as well. You can do 2 sessions in the same day if you have the time, and you're going to milder pressures typically for the 2 sessions a day kind of thing. But you really want to get to sort of this threshold where your body becomes more sustainably shifted. You can get a benefit from just one-off sessions, from a recovery perspective, from feeling a little bit more energy, to sleeping better, to even boosting performance, depending on how you use the chamber. So like, for example, one of the things that I do, and one of the protocols I developed, is a 30-minute hyperbaric session. If you just do 30 minutes in the chamber and then you directly go into something cold afterwards, cold shower, ice bath, that kind of thing, you're going to feel like $1 million for the rest of the day. So there's a lot of different ways you can use one-off sessions like that. Like I'll use them for jet lag, for example. Somebody comes off a plane, they've been at low oxygen for their whole plane flight, right? You're pressurized on an airplane to 8,000 feet most of the time, and 6,000 feet if you're on a Dreamliner. So you're getting less oxygen on the plane. And so that's one of the reasons why you feel like shit when you get off, not only just the jet lag from time zones as well. So getting hyperoxygenated afterwards can be really helpful. And so I have people go in and do one-off sessions, typically in milder units or milder pressures for the most part with those kinds of things. But that's your questions. There's not one answer to it. But I would say that if you're looking for like long-term benefits of not just being in the chamber, but seeing it after you leave and are not in the chamber for a little while, you want to do like a block of therapy if you can. But
20 sessions.
20 sessions is kind of your minimum typically, yeah.
Like 5 a week for 4 weeks.
Yes.
And what about a home chamber? Do you have one you recommend?
Yeah, I do. I work with a number of companies that make these things, but I have a company that I really like that's out of the UK, and they're called Henshaw, and they have a local distribution in Florida. And what I like about this particular company is that these home units, they are triangular. So they have your ability to sit in them and not just lie down flat, because if you guys have seen pictures, then has anybody ever heard of Michael Jackson using hyperbaric therapy? That's always a favorite for people. So I used to do lectures where I play Michael Jackson songs, and then after each one of his documentaries comes out, I have to take it out of my lecture for another year, and then I can put it back in, and it's one of those kinds of things. But most hyperbaric chambers are cylindrical, and they're like tube-looking chambers. But this one's nice because it's a triangular one, and it's got a lazy boy recliner in there kind of thing, and so you can actually go in there, do work, and I actually bring a lot of things in there technology-wise. I can I'll bring in my lights. I'll bring in electric stim if I need it. I can do neurofeedback in there if it's portable, meditation, or I can just take phone calls. And I've done podcasts inside of my chamber too.
Oh, amazing.
Well. Oh yeah. Not this one today, but
A piggyback question to that is, I would imagine people needing to really understand the nuances of protocols, with the disease or the condition or the outcome that you want. How do people go and find a center that they could be confident that people are certified into these protocols and not just, giving people random, therapy without any data behind it?
Yeah. I mean, we all know this as medical professionals. If you have a specialty, that's what you recommend, right? So I was asked to give a talk to my peers, the hyperbaric peers, about a year ago, about a year ago, year and a half ago. And the title of my talk was going to be, "Please do not put them in the chamber." And I realized I was probably a little bit too provocative, but the challenge that you have is that if you have a therapy, that's what you recommend. I mean, everybody's sort of guilty of this in their own ways, whether it's in medicine or it's a business or a wealth investment firm or whatever, right? So what I like to say is that if you have an acute indication for hyperbaric therapy, there's not a whole lot you need to do otherwise, rather than just getting into the chamber. Most places will be able to do a relatively good job with that. I think if you have a more of a long-term goal or a chronic disease or chronic condition, that's when you really want to make sure that the place that you're going has either a practitioner you can speak to that has more of a view rather than just hyperbaric therapy.
Right.
I also advocate, and I talk to people all over the country. So I consult with people and help them find local facilities. And I know a lot of the facilities around the US and other locations to help out with that too. So that's one of the main things I do. I consult with people remotely and virtually through my website, and people contact me, and then I help them develop protocols, and then I help integrate all these other kinds of things and try to make it more holistic for them rather than just getting into the chamber. So I think long story short is that make sure that the clinic that you're going to has a bit more, if they don't have a holistic perspective, I would consider trying to find somebody that has a little bit more of a knowledge about how you can integrate hyperbaric therapy with other technologies. Unfortunately, there are a decent amount of places out there that just put people in chambers.
Yeah. We want to avoid that. We've got time for one more question, so I'm going to call up Robert. You can go ahead and unmute yourself, Robert.
Scott, thank you. This was so interesting. I think you just cost me 20 grand too. And my vision board needed a little bit of room, next to the float pod and the plunge pool and the sauna and the
it's certainly part of all that. Yeah.
So, my dream house just grew by a couple hundred square feet, but
Nice.
I had a really random question. When I was 21, I was backpacking in Australia, and I was actually at this backpacker. So we had a dive camp there, and, I was 21, we partied a lot. And every morning, and this was the trick that the dive masters did, we would take an oxygen tank and go sit on the bottom of the pool for 10 minutes. And literally your hangover would be gone. Now
that's amazing.
Is that kind of a similar effect to this, or is it just completely random? Because it worked like a dream. I mean, you could be literally like, still shit-faced, and, you would come up 10 minutes later and you would be like clear as day. But I don't know.
Thank you so much for that story. That is an amazing story.
This sounds like a great business opportunity.
No, I mean, so they've done studies looking at patients with, just to take it medical for a second, and I'll take it back to that in a minute, but they've done studies looking at patients with PTSD and traumatic brain injury and how they can recover diving under the water. Mm-hmm. And they think it's because of the pretty ocean view and the fish. That might be part of it, but there's pressure and there's oxygen, and that's regenerating their brain. Yeah. And I use hyperbaric therapy for hangover protocols all the time, Robert. Yeah. And it's the reason for that is that it's oxygenating and it's detoxing you. Yeah. And so absolutely, I've never heard that before, and I'm so excited you told me about that.
Well, and the other thing about scuba diving is when you become a decent scuba diver, you start controlling your breath. And so you slow down your breath, you slow down your heart rate, and you go into parasymptomatic, right? So because just because of the control of the breath, because you're preserving oxygen in your tank. Otherwise, in 15 minutes, you're back at the surface. Right. So I think that's actually a big part of why scuba diving is, you just feel rejuvenated when you come out of the water. It's not just the scenery. There's also something going on because you're so, it's like meditation in a way, because you're so focused on your breath and preservation of oxygen.
Yeah. Parasympathetic activities are extremely important for the reasons you just mentioned. And hyperbaric therapy can certainly be one of those, especially the longer protocols. They tend to become, initially when you start going into a chamber, you might get a little sympathetic. You get a little bit of your blood pressure goes up slightly because you have a mild vasoconstriction of your blood vessels. But that shifts after about 30 or 45 minutes to more of a parasympathetic state. And even when you're breathing your tank underwater, that's 21% oxygen. But because you're under pressure, you're getting more oxygen in circulation. So, for example, in a mild chamber at the house, that goes to 1.3, which is about 10 feet of seawater.
Right.
Without any extra oxygen, you're just breathing 21% oxygen, you get about 46% more oxygen in circulation. Right. Now, if you increase the amount of oxygen that you're breathing at 1.3 atmospheres, you can go up to about 500% more oxygen or 500% in circulation. So I haven't heard of that as a jet lag cure, but I'm not sorry, as a hangover cure, but I dig it. It's very Australian. I was there when I was 21 as well. So I know exactly what you mean. I didn't do any of that, but that sounds like
fun.
fun.
And if you want to have a jet lag cure, it's actually, if you think about the meridians of the Earth, go Earth. So once you come off the plane, I used to fly 500,000 miles a year all over the world. And then when you get bare feet, when you do earthing, grounding,
yes, yeah,
you're actually tie into the meridians, so that, and then when you regulate your food in the time zone where you're going, those two things, you never have a jet lag again.
Yeah, you're the master at it for that many miles. But yeah, I mean, my goal with so I have another company called HBOT Plus, and my company's goal is to sort of create technology that makes it easier to use hyperbaric therapy in an effective, safe, and therapeutic way. And so we've created we're working on a phone application that is already sort of built in with all your wellness protocols that are ready for you for a mild unit. So once you get your unit, you know how to use it. There's a lot of education in there too. And then we're creating a technology that's changing pressures the way I was describing before, that does this in a prescribed way to help with optimizing blood flow and lymphatic flow as well. And so I'm really excited by where my field is going. It's certainly an expensive technology, as you were alluding to. Buying a chamber can cost you anywhere between 13 to 14 to 23K for a mild unit. And the medical grade units are obviously going to cost more than that. But there's different ways. There's rental options. And I've been working on various ways with Henshaw and other companies to get rental options for people that want to try it for 2-3 months at a time and see how they feel. And obviously there's heart chamber locations you can go to as well and get an experience at the same time.
Scott, this was a plethora of information. We all know just from this experience here, what an expert you are in this field. For people who are listening out there, how do people find more about you and how to reach out to you if they want a consult?
So Integrative HBOT.com is my website. So the word integrative and the letters HBOT. That's probably the most straightforward way to contact me. I have an Instagram that I should pay more attention to, like Dr. Vu over here, but it's at Dr. Scott Sherr, DrScottSherr. I also have a Facebook group, I think it's called. I just don't use Facebook anymore as much as I used to, but it's called Optimized Hyperbaric Therapy with Dr. Scott Sherr or something like that. If you search for me on Facebook, you'll find a group, and those are the major places for the most part. And HBOT.plus is the website for my company as well. So it's www.hbot.plus as and so those are the major places. But yes, happy to speak to people and help them understand how best to use hyperbaric therapy in an integrative context. I work with lots of providers of hyperbaric therapy, but also of everything that you can imagine, everything from the jungles of Peru to the northern latitudes of Finland and everything in between, to help people on their journeys to optimizing their health. So
amazing. And the last question for you is, what has been your best medicine?
I would say meditation, probably. I didn't learn how to meditate, or didn't think I could, like many people did. I don't think they can, until about 3 or 4 years ago. When I started adding that into my daily routines, it was really transformative, especially having 4 young children at home, knowing that the external world is uncontrollable is what it comes down to in so many levels. And so even during the podcast, I was starting to get boo-boos and other kinds of things. But that was a big shift for me. And a lot of this had to do with what I initially mentioned in your rapid questions when I won dinner with you kind of thing. When I was talking about my failures, it was I was failing because I was trying too hard in some level. And I was sort of butting against intellectually, I was fine, but it was my ability to take a step back and look at the forest from the trees. And meditation was a big part of that for me, and really diving into my own health as well. I mean, when you're young, you can get away with most anything, even if you're a healthcare practitioner. But then you start getting a little bit older, you start waking up with aches and pains or energy issues, and you go, what's going on here, right? So all those things really were transformed when I started checking in with myself more often in a meditative context, I would say.
That's beautiful. Dr. Scott Sherr, thanks for joining us on the Thrive State podcast, brother.
Thanks for having me, guys. This has been fun.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Thrive State podcast. And if this podcast is bringing a lot of value to you, if you find that your life is just improving with this podcast, that your life is getting to the next level, please consider supporting it. And here's a few ways you can do so. You can do so by liking this video and commenting on this video, and also sharing this video with your friends and family. Another thing you can do is go to ratethispodcast.com/ThriveState. Go ahead and leave us a 5-star review there. It will really, really help this show grow. And this will give me more time so that I could actually give more content to you, just like you got in this episode. And if you haven't already picked up a copy of my book, Thrive State, Your Blueprint for Optimal Health, Longevity, and Peak Performance, you can pick it up now. It became a #1 new release in longevity. Go to thrivestatebook.com. And if you enjoy the book, please consider leaving us a review as well. And the last thing you can do, if you're liking everything here and you want to work more closely with me as well as my team to get you into the Thrive State, go to kienvu.com/accelerator and consider joining the home course, the Thrive State Accelerator. It's really the course that I use. It's the concepts that I use personally when I work with CEOs, celebrities, and my high-profile clients to get them to the Thrive State. Again, the Thrive State Accelerator at kienvu.com/accelerator. And because you're a listener of this podcast, I want you to save 25% by using the coupon code podcast25. I hope we continue to give value to you. And remember always, you are your best medicine.